We continue in Genesis 22 today as Abraham rises early in the morning to saddle his donkey. So we've been continuing from this first part of the chapters we saw last time. We just did these first two verses in the last video, and we'll be getting to these two chiasms. The part we're on today matches the end, as you can see here. If I move that out a little bit so you can see the whole shape. The rising early, and they arose, and the young men, and we will come back to you in the return. So we're continuing to fill in this area before we get to this little chiasm. And we can see the key words in here are the ones that continue throughout: the burnt offering, other than the young men, and the key question of the place, which, as I noted last time, can suggest a sacred place, including the temple, as is true in texts like Deuteronomy 16. But that's certainly not in the direct mind of people here. So let's go back to our verse, and we see Abraham rose early, and we looked earlier at rose early, but here we'll look at it again so we can see the connection between this scene and other ones. So specifically connecting back to Abimelech rising early in chapter 20, and also connecting ahead to chapter 26, where Isaac and Abimelech meet again and rise early. And one of many ways that third wife-sister story and the second encounter between one of the patriarchs and Abimelech echo in many different ways. And we'll see later Jacob rise early in the morning, and then eventually Laban rises early in the morning. Back to our passage. So he rose early in the morning, and doing that, then he does a series of things that scholars have wondered about in terms of the sequence and in terms of what it says about Abraham's mental capacity at this point. So he saddled his donkey, and as many people have commented, there's two issues here. One, that's beneath his dignity. He has servants and slaves, and so normally they would be saddling his donkey. It's not something he would do himself, as my note here below from Middleton has, that instead of leaving these tasks to servants. But it also should be done last. Saddling the donkey is the last thing you do. You wouldn't saddle the donkey and then leave it saddled while you do a bunch of other tasks. So it's out of order, and that's not all there is to it. Then he took two of his young men with him, and we see them here, the Narib here, and we saw them earlier, but otherwise we just hear about slaves, so we don't really know who those are. Naar's young men are throughout Genesis in a number of places you can see below, but in this passage they're silent, and they're only at the beginning and the end. And they really have nothing to do directly with the story, except they're obviously witnesses to whatever is going to happen or what's not going to happen. So he took two of his young men with him, with his son Isaac, and we're seeing that repeated here. And as Middleton notes, and others have noted, the Midrash notes it as well, he's surrounded on either side by three silent actions of his father. So let's look at that again. Abraham rose, he saddled, and he took. Then there's the son Isaac. He cut, he set out, and he went. So we see Isaac surrounded by the hard work of his father. Here is 137 or 100 and something year old father, depending again on how old we think Isaac is in this scene. And so much of this would make no sense to Isaac, regardless of whatever age he was. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering. And as Wenham notes, three possibilities there: that he's either confused, or he keeping a secret from the servants, or he's trying to postpone. But Middleton notes that it would make much more sense to gather sticks at the end of the journey rather than carry the wood the whole way. If they're going up on a mountain, there's almost certainly going to be some kind of sticks and bushes or something that you could use for the fire. So why cut it and carry it the whole way here? Is a question. The word for wood here is atsi, used for wood or tree. It's only here in Genesis as wood. And as tree, it's used only in the garden story, the making of the ark, the entertaining of the visitors, and later on as a pole in the Joseph story. But it's certainly important here because it's setting up the burnt offering. But what's going to happen with it? We don't hear yet what happens to it. Later, he'll put it on Isaac. But you'd think it would go on the donkey, as many artistic images certainly suggest it would. And set out and went to the place. Notice it doesn't say anything about Isaac going. This is singular, that he went to the place. But of course, Isaac's coming along. And as Wenham notes below, it's an indication of additional unnarrated divine commands along with taking the donkey and servants. The phrase "in the distance" is not in either the Hebrew or the Greek in the Septuagint, so that's been added here to fit with what we'll see in a couple of more verses, especially in verse 4 here. So that God had shown him. And we have to ask, when did that happen? If we just go back a little bit, just to the previous verse, it says, one of the mountains that I shall show you. So in the meantime, there's just mourning, and he's doing all these tasks, and somewhere in the midst of that, God has shown him the place, at least in his vision. But it's not until the third day they look up and see it. And so we have to pause there too. The phrase third day, many scholars have noted, is a proverbial time for sometime later. So we don't have to literally think of it as 3 days. See a number of other on the third days in Genesis. But it can certainly echo the Exodus story. We've already seen a couple of echoes of Exodus, including the testing. So let's look at a couple of these from Exodus and we can see what the audience might hear. So in Exodus 3:18 we hear, "Then they will listen to your voice, and you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt," this is Moses' voice, "and say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Now let us go on a 3 days' journey into the wilderness, so we may sacrifice to Yahweh our God." So echoing a 3-day journey to the wilderness to offer sacrifice. And the same thing at Exodus 5:3 here. Then they said, this is the Egyptians reversing it, "The God of the Hebrews has revealed himself to us. Let us go on a 3-day journey into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God, or he will fall upon us with pestilence or sword." So the echo of a 3-day journey into the wilderness to make a sacrifice. And if you watch the last video on the first 2 verses, you'll know there was an ambiguity, and the translation doesn't reveal here on "take your son and offer him," because the Hebrew for offer can mean just simply take him up to the mountain. And that's a tension that we need to have in the story so that we don't unfairly believe that we know already that Abraham intends to sacrifice Isaac. We don't know that. We know that that's one of the 2 possibilities, but the narrator here is making it exquisitely uncertain about what the plan is at this point, and that will continue to be suspenseful throughout. So on the third day, Abraham looked, literally he lifted up his eyes and saw, and we see that in verse 13, and we saw that back in chapter 13 when Lot looked at the land, and we saw it a number of times. So that Hebrew phrase for "lifted up your eyes and looked," and saw the place, again echoing, so that's 3 times there, highlighting that repeated reference to the place, far away. And here we do see it's far away. The Hebrew rakak here means far away. And again, we can look at a couple of the Exodus examples where we see that. So here, Moses' sister Miriam stood at a distance when Moses is a baby in the ark to see what would happen. And then we see similar things here where the people are afraid of coming up to the mountain and they stood at a distance. So in those places, standing at a distance usually means either fear or not wanting to be seen. But here they're approaching this place far away. And so on this third day of the journey, Abraham said to the young men, again, who have say nothing, "Stay here with the donkey." Literally, the verb here, shavu lachem here, means to like settle here. And as Wenham notes, no reason is given, whether to avoid their seeing or the possible difficulty of the climb for the donkey, but of course not for the 100-plus-year-old man, or etc. But as my note below suggests, the donkey would otherwise be carrying the wood and the other provisions, and they're now on their own. Why would they leave the donkey behind? And of course, we'll see next scene that Abraham lays the wood on his son. But why leave the donkey behind? It's not like the donkey is going to tell anybody what happens or doesn't happen. So he leaves the young men with the donkey, and then he says very vaguely to them, "The boy and I will go over there." And the word for over there, ad ko, literally means to thus, and it's not telling them a specific place. And so if they wanted to follow, they wouldn't really know where it is. Then he says, "We will worship and come back to you," at least in this translation. And my first note suggests it's a direct lie, but others disagree, and we'll go down to look at that. We'll look at it here. As Wenham notes, it's a vaguer term than offer, either as a lack of resolve or a desire to hide the truth. But as my note from Killian has below, it prepares the way for the last stage of the journey with its dialogue between father and son. This is the real reason the servants were left behind. The question, therefore, whether Abraham concealed his purpose or just lied is out of place. He presupposes a custom one meets in many other religions. What is peculiar is that this is the only place in the Old Testament where it occurs. That from Westerman. But if it's the only place in the Old Testament that it occurs, how does he know that it's a custom? And so there's a question about that, and other scholars have not agreed. The term for worship has been used earlier simply for bowing down. So we saw both to the visitors in chapter 18 and to Yahweh for Lot for the visitors in chapter 19. And we'll see Abraham bows down to the Hittites in chapter 23. 23. So it can mean worship, but he's certainly not worshiping the Hittites, and he's certainly not worshiping the visitors that he doesn't know are Yahweh in disguise. So it simply suggests we will bow down, and it's not clear what it is that the servants are supposed to understand they're going to do. But then many readers, knowing what's going to happen, believe Abraham is lying here when he says, we will come back to you. But does he already intend to sacrifice Isaac? Again, we have to pay attention. Maybe he really understood that he's simply bringing Isaac up there. In which case, why would he leave the servants behind? And that's the tension here. So the servants and the donkey are left behind, and father and son will go on and have the only conversation they have in their entire life. And that's what we'll see next time. See you then for that. Bye-bye.